you finding my page on YouTube, and if you subscribe, you'll get an alert every time I upload a video. You can also turn off that alert and just be subscribed, so that if you feel like logging in or you're on YouTube, you'll see a quick announcement if I've posted new videos there as well. And also those subscriber those counts go into YouTube land in terms of helping my videos show up in the feeds when people search on certain topics. So it looks like we're working there. So it doesn't look like it's jittery or anything. So, oh, here we go. There. All right. So, sorry about that. I always start out these videos confirming that we're streaming along here. So, topic. Let's get right to that. Today I wanted to discuss candy bars. No, actually I want to talk about these quote-unquote health food bars, and I mean, these are about as prevalent now as fast food. And the question is, are there any of these that are worth bothering with, and are they healthy? And if you're like me and you're on the go, it's nice to have a meal in a bag, in a pack like this, so that you have it ready to go, especially doing biking, hiking, traveling, throwing it in your suitcase, and even just having them in the car. It's kept me going. So, but here's the thing, a lot of these now are becoming so popular that it's sort of the alternative to candy and candy bars, etc. And what I've discovered over the last few years is that many of the quote-unquote nutritional bars or protein bars are little more than, I mean, they're essentially no better than candy bars. Yet they're marketed as nutritional bars, and a lot of claims and stuff. I mean, such flavors as birthday cake and glazed and amused. Glazed. I have to give this company credit for enticing packaging. I think it's very slick. But I mean, honestly, do we need flavors and amount of sweetness that makes us think about cake and donuts? And they do this because it's marketing and they sell. My kids ask for these all the time. Now, just because the pictures are pretty and they might taste like the foods in these pictures, does that mean they're bad? Well, not necessarily, but let's get into the details. So, I guess let me go through a couple of trends that have happened within the nutritional bars. So, probably the biggest one over the last 5 to 10 years is the increase in protein, and even the term protein bar. So, originally there was the granola bar, and then you had companies like Power Bar and Cliff Bar. And basically it's, you know, cereal-based or grains-based products in a bar. So, you know, they were predominantly providing, you know, quick energy. And some of them were actually pretty decent, you know, whole grains, naturally sweetened, and a fair amount of fiber. And then you had sort of the onset of the high-protein craze that happened, geez, like 20 years ago now. And so you had Atkins diet and the Zone diet, and you had these support products, including bars for those. And then you started to see companies like Power Bar and Cliff Bar and everybody else jumping on the high protein, you know, kick. And so they started basically enhancing their bars with protein. So now you've got, you know, brands like Premier Protein, and again, there's one. You've got Lara bars. You've got tons and tons of different companies and products. So I think that was a good step in moving into providing more protein in a bar. However, there's always is the issue: is there a good quality protein in the product? So, and suffice it to say that most bars are using one of two kinds of proteins, and each of those has their inherent problems, and so in my opinion not the best, but that's soy protein, and the other is whey protein, or casein, which is another milk protein. So basically soy protein or dairy protein, or both sometimes. Now, soy protein is probably the most popular that's been put into protein bars and other products as a way to bump up the protein level. soy protein has some issues, and I'll go through them. So long story short, is not my favorite protein. Soy protein is heavily processed. It's hard to digest. It has, in soy foods, there are certain chemicals, things called enzyme inhibitors, and it makes it very difficult to digest, for one. Soy can also be a high allergen, and so it's not an ideal protein to be getting. I don't recommend soy protein other than a few soy foods that are available that's more of an actual food source, not a processed kind of a junk protein. I mean, soy protein is basically a byproduct of the soybean industry, where most of that soybean is being used for animal feeds and for oils and margarine and inexpensive protein and oils. So heavily processed industry, though. We've long known there's an association with thyroid problems from the soy protein consumption, and digestive problems, as well as the allergen component. There is a lot of phytoestrogens in soy, which is why it's been promoted for women to help with things like hot flashes. But again, because of the problems I just mentioned, and because not all of us need phytoestrogens, we really don't need soy protein in the amounts that's being pumped into our food supply. So anyway, now you have, though, now more of the milk proteins are showing up in these products, so whey and casein. And so, as I did discuss already in a previous dairy conversation a couple of weeks ago, I won't go into all the problems with dairy protein. For me personally, I would rather consume dairy protein than soy protein. But if you have a dairy allergy, or if you're diabetic or have insulin resistance, you want to be careful with the dairy protein, as I mentioned. Again, look at that other video. I'll try to link it down below as well from this video. So what are my favorite proteins? Well, for bars now, we're starting to see those show up, and that is pea protein, and the other one is the bio beef, or the hydrolyzed beef protein. Now that one's a little bit less common to find. I've not found good sources or common sources of the beef protein in bars yet, but the dairy-free rice and or pea protein's a little more of a complete protein. That would be my favorite in a lot of the bars right now. Okay, so that's the protein story. Now, just as an aside, you don't always need protein in your bars, and as I've gone into the more of a low-carb, high-fat diet, really what I'm looking for is the balanced macros for more of a ketogenic or low-carb lifestyle, which is not high protein. And very few bars have gotten that message and figured that out. Some are, and I'm actually supposed to be getting this week a new keto bar from the Kiss My Keto brand, and I'll be reviewing that separately coming up. So basically, a lot of these keto bars are coming out, and they're essentially kind of a hybrid fat bomb that's in a package that you can eat on the go, and it doesn't melt, hopefully. That is a problem. I tried one company, and they just tasted very artificial, and they, how there's warnings on that. Don't leave it out of the refrigerator, and even in a room temperature warm car. I mean, that's not really practical to have a bar that's just going to melt at the slightest temperature elevation. So anyway, getting bars that have a better macro profile with more fat, modest amounts of protein, and of course low carb, and even better levels of fiber is really what we're looking for. And so I have found the best that so far I like for balance. These aren't strictly keto, but they're the best dairy-free based ones that don't use the junk protein and actually have some good nutrition. There's a little bit of sugar alcohols, and I'll get into the sweeteners in just a second, because that's another big problem in the bars out there. And so Designs for Health, there's other good companies as well, but this is essentially their whole foods. They use a little bit of sugar alcohols to sweeten them, and they have good sources of protein, and they actually taste pretty decent. The MochaNRG dairy-free I like. They make another NRG bar that has the milk proteins in it, and that one I like as well. But again, I'm trying to go more dairy-free. From all the dairy protein, I like this one. And they are using for the protein, it's a rice protein blend in here. So the other one, so that's the MochaNRG dairy-free. Their essential bars are also really good, and their protein source is rice and pea protein blended. This does have just a little more carbohydrate than the NRG, if I'm remembering that correctly. But again, net carbs is relatively low. I typically use these though for on the go, maybe before riding or off the bike when I need just a little more carbohydrates, or if you're going to exercise. They are not, again, strictly ketogenic bars. So anyway, the best that I've been able to find. So what's the problem with the sweeteners? So like this brand and a number of others, and there's tons of them now that are using artificial sweeteners. So let me talk about those really quickly. So as we've tried to get sugar out of our diets, we often turn to sugar alternatives. And I have long been studying this and watching for what are those that are healthy and what are those that are not. And when it comes to artificial sweeteners, we've got a history of use and problems that have come up. If anyone remembers saccharin, and then the studies that linked it with cancer, you saw that fall out of favor, and then NutraSweet or aspartame came out, which is still widely available and used, and that also has a lot of problems. These are all synthetic, and they have both neurological problems. They are an unnatural molecule in the body that can trigger problems, allergies, sensitivities, etc. And the other one now that's very, very popular is sucralose, or Splenda is the branded name on that. And what that is it's a sugar-like molecule that they've manipulated to remove some of the, I believe, the OH groups that are on normal sugars, the hydroxide molecule. Instead, they're attaching a chloride molecule. So this is all this is chemistry here, and it appears unnatural in the gut. I guess the main issue that's come up in studies is that it seems to kill or break down and eliminate our healthy flora. So if you're using a lot of artificial sweeteners, you might be disrupting the gut. And as anybody knows who's been listening to some of the natural research that's coming out on the microbiome and the gut health, that when we disrupt our natural flora, it can have major implications into our health. It's not just about maybe getting a stomach ache once in a while. It can literally change our immunity, our sensitivities to things like allergies, autoimmune diseases, etc. And so, is it worth it? I don't think so. Studies have shown just a normal dose of the amount of sucralose we're getting in food can wipe out up to 50% of our healthy flora in the gut. So the other thing is I'd like to talk about stevia, because that's showing up, of course, as one of the ones I've promoted and used a lot for the last probably close to 20 years. There are studies that also show that stevia is also potentially disrupting the gut flora. And I am going to be investigating and reading more of this research going forward. I am still using a little bit of stevia, but I would say based on what I'm seeing so far, I'm starting to recommend and think about using stevia less and looking at other alternatives. I know this seems like a revolving door, or a nutritional knowledge, and in the media and in even what doctors promote, we are learning new things, and new things come out, and we are changing what we're saying. First it was low fat, and then it was high protein, and then it's high fat, and it's like, okay, what's going to be the next thing? Eggs are bad, now they're good, and it's like, I think we just have to keep interpreting knowledge carefully and be careful of what's being promoted and sold versus what the research actually says. And so stevia, the one advantage with stevia, of course, is you can use minuscule amounts in sweetening things, which is what you want to do anyway, because stevia is very potent. And so I don't think the effects are going to be nearly as bad as the other sweeteners, which are being used in much higher amounts. There are, though, let me talk a little briefly about sugar alcohols. As far as we know, there aren't negative side effects from those, and that includes things like mannitol, xylitol, and erythritol. There's also sorbitol, And aside from some minor GI effects, sometimes there's a little bit of a upset stomach and even diarrhea if somebody overconsumes xylitol. It doesn't appear any research is showing any disruption of the gut or causing other ill effects. In fact, xylitol has been studied and shown to enhance the healthy flora in both the mouth and the bowel. Erythritol doesn't show really any effects, negative, positive, so it's almost the most inert sweetener I have seen. With all that said, I would say that I'm almost gravitating back towards the natural sweeteners that have sugar in them, and with the caveat that they just need to be handled with caution and used very sparingly. Those would be things like honey and maple syrup. I like those two because the flavors go a long way and there's health benefits with them. And I use just tiny amounts. And so we need to, I think, desensitize our bodies to wanting so much sweet, or probably a better way to say it is resensitize our bodies to sweet by just cutting out so much of the sweets. And I think artificial sweeteners only feed the problem in making us want to eat more foods. So whether we're putting maple syrup all over our waffles or we're using stevia or Splenda sucralose, we're going to overconsume calories, and that's the bottom line. So anyway, the jury's still out a little bit on this, but I would check your labels and I would look for sucralose. It's on the last ingredient typically. They're not using probably a ton of it, but honestly, I think most bars are even oversweetened above what they need to be. I almost prefer just to be starting to make my own health bar, which I've done before, but sure, it's not as convenient. Lastly, just a quick mention on acylsulfame K. That's another one you'll see on the labels. Again, I haven't seen a lot of research of bad things with it, but it, I believe, is also shown to disrupt the healthy flora in the gut. So again, these are chemicals that aren't natural in nature and typically not going to benefit our bodies to use them. So anyway, if you'd like to see the links to some of these bars that I have found, I'm continuing to look for good ones and good alternatives. If you've got a favorite bar, put it in the comments below and I'll certainly do a review and you can share it with others who might find this broadcast. So as always, I always go a little bit longer than I probably start out to, but let me know what you think, and please subscribe and like if you've enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for our next live stream video. So thanks for watching.